Hello, everybody. Welcome to, thank you for joining us today. My name is Peter Eckstein. I am Vice President for Jewish Education at the Jewish Federation of Palm Beach County. On behalf of both my federation and the Israel Policy Forum, we're honored to have you all join this national audience for today's presentation. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome. This informational webinar will give you a holistic view of the war that began with that horrific attack on October 7th on Israel. We hope that this will help clarify the current situation in our Jewish homeland and empower each of us to confidently engage in conversations based on facts, not on just what we hear through various media outlets. Our featured speaker today is Dr. Shira Efron, Senior Director of Policy Research at Israel Policy Forum. Dr. Efron is the Diane and Guilford Glazier Foundation Senior Director of Policy Research at Israel Policy Forum. Previously, Shira was a RAND Corporation's researcher and special advisor on Israel and a policy advisor to Israel Policy Forum. Based in Israel, Efron serves concurrently as a senior fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies, a consultant to the United Nations Country Team in Jerusalem, advising on Gaza access issues, and co-chair of the subgroup on the national security and regional cooperation of the President's Israeli Climate Change Forum. She has a PhD and a master's in philosophy and policy analysis from Rand Graduate School, an MA in International Relations and International Business from New York University, and a Bachelor in Science in Biology and Computer Science. Very well-rounded. Those last two degrees came from Tel Aviv University. She's a member of the Board of Directors of Deborah Forum, which promotes women in the security establishment. Following the presentation, we're going to have a conversation. Please post your questions in the Q&A, and we're going to try to make this interactive as much as possible. Welcome, Dr. Efron. We're really happy that you're here to talk about this complicated subject. I'm not sure if happy was the right word, but we're grateful that you're here to join us. Could you give us an overview of the current situation, what's happening in Gaza, and the challenges Israel are facing at the moment?
Sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And Palm Beach is a beautiful place, and it's good for you. You're all spending your time there. And it's true. These are not happy times. These are difficult times. But I do appreciate the opportunity to have a candid conversation, and I encourage all of you to ask me anything you want. In terms of just my employers, Israel Policy Forum, I need to update my bio. I'll just say I'm no longer with the UN. And I'm no longer with INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies. The rest is correct. What I am doing, although in the past 60 days, I've been on reserve duty with the IDF. So some things are a little bit more sensitive, and I would not be able to discuss because they're like the inside of military discussions. But I will try to provide the best accurate, unclassified picture that I can, and I think this will suffice. So I just for viewers who may not know the fundamentals of Gaza. So the Gaza Strip is part of the sort of Palestinian territories. It's non-contiguous part that's supposedly one day will be part of a Palestinian state with the West Bank. We're talking about a territory of 141 square miles. In the metric system, it's easier to remember, 365 square kilometers, with a population of 2.3 million people. So quite densely populated place. It's like the area of Washington, D.C. And October 7th, we're actually exactly 2 months to October 7th, right? December 7th. With the onslaught of Hamas, and we don't have a map here, but it's basically all the the kibbutzim and the moshavim, like on the border of Gaza, north to south, were attacked. Israel started. The IDF began its aerial campaign in Gaza, and followed by a ground operation. The military component of this, and we don't have the map, but Gaza is like, it's a long strip. And in the middle of the strip, around the middle of the strip, we have we have like small river. There are no real rivers in Israel, it's all dry here, but it's called Wadi Gaza. And essentially, and you know this because you lived on Kibbutz Keturah, not even south from there. Initially, the IDF began working in the northern part of Gaza, and this is where you saw all the pictures in the U.S. news. You saw the Shifa hospitals and all these things you saw. This was sort of the first part of the operation, the ground operation, aerial bombardment. We then saw a humanitarian pause that some called ceasefire, by no means a ceasefire, that brought home over 100 over 110 hostages, Israelis and non. And then once the IDF got back, and this brings us to your question, where are we now? The IDF is still operating in parts it has not completed in the north. So we're talking about Jabalia, Shajaiya, Zaytun. These are famous names, unfortunately, for Israelis, because every military operation we hear about these places. But at the same time, we're seeing that most of the effort is actually in the south, in the area called Han Yunis, where Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader in Gaza, and the it's terrible to say, but the brain behind this attack and behind Hamas strategy in recent years, that's where his family is. We heard Prime Minister Netanyahu being proud of the IDF forces like circling his home. Of course, he's not home, but as a place, this is considered, a place where there are a lot of Hamas militants. The military wing, they're not on the ground, they're underground in tunnels, but this is an area that's where we are, the IDF is focusing. We're seeing aerial bombardments, and we're seeing heavy fighting on the ground. They're facing 4 battalions of Hamas that are protecting the city, and the reports we're getting are of difficult fighting. More difficult than we saw in the north. Unfortunate news of the former colleague of mine and a friend, former chief of staff, Gadi Eisenkot. He's now a minister, just lost his son today. He's famous, but others. So you keep getting the news about IDF casualties. It's very dense. It's very difficult to fight in the tunnels. Most of the fighting, it doesn't go like military to military. What we see is Hamas small teams trying to strike. Where you have a lot of IEDs, RPGs. So it's asymmetric warfare. They operate within the centers of population, using them as human shields, and of course under the ground. And it's very difficult to get on the ground because the tunnel operation is much more extensive than any one of us thought. So we're talking about tunnels that are dug deep, even 30, 40 meters down. So that would be 120 feet. It's very hard to get there. The dilemmas where we are. So I'll tell you, first of all, when the IDF started in the north, they urged the population to move south. So about close to 1 million people moved south. Those people were not allowed to move back north. So now in the south, where you had around 1 million people, you have now 2 million people. And now the IDF is telling them, well, we are coming to fight here. You have to move, but there's really nowhere to go. So there's a challenge in terms of the humanitarian toll, which we can get to it. But it is, if the IDF tries to minimize casualties, it's difficult because really you're working within the operation, within the population. There is the issue of the hostages who are still there and believed to be used as human shields for the leaders of the organizations. They're probably in the tunnels. So there's outrage by the families of hostages here that are really fearful for their loved ones' lives, rightly so. With every day that passes, their life is more at risk, possibly even from IDF strikes, but also what Hamas will do to them and how they will use them. And then, of course, there's the issue that the whole world is watching, and Israel got tremendous backing. I think backing that was really needed here, backing in ammunition and supported the UN and the hug and the compassion from primarily President Biden. but also, from the UK and from France and from Germany got tremendous backing. But at one point, 2 months later, with numbers of casualties in Gaza that are really horrific, most of them are women and children, because that's the population makeup of Gaza, and other humanitarian aspects, the loss of shelter, basic supplies, insufficient food. There's pressure on Israel to sort of bring this to not to a close, but at least run the operation differently. And that creates those pressures that we're saying, wait, if we want to eliminate Hamas, this is the way to do it. If Israel had a year now to fight like that, they can probably eliminate Hamas. The world is not going to give Israel a year to operate this way. So I think we're in a critical phase. There's like until the end of 2023. We're talking about a few more weeks for that type of an operation. Then probably might move to more like standoff operations. Would that happen? And there's the international dimension, and there's also the Israeli dimension internally, right? This country, it's those of you who know, it's a small country. It's a strong country with tremendous resilience, but it's a small country. Having numbers that I'm not sure if they were disclosed, but hundreds of thousands in reserve duty. People don't go to work, haven't been schools. The universities, while in the U.S., my colleagues are going on a winter break, we have not started the year. Okay, in terms of you can't train doctors, you can't train lawyers. The economy, the war costs a lot of money. So in a sense, I think the Israeli, the country as itself, the country, the economy, the people here we cannot internally even withstand this for a lengthy period of time. So I think we're in a critical stage. This stage will probably end in the next, I don't want to give exact date, but within the next few weeks, month or so. And then we're going to go into something that is just a little bit more sustainable. Of course, the hope is that during this month, Israel will, the military achievements will be significant, helping to really hurt Hamas in ways that we haven't hurt. Hamas is hurt, but not hurt as we would have liked it to be until now. And obviously, and this is my view, that also by limiting the humanitarian damage and the death toll to civilians in Gaza, and maintaining some international legitimacy, and hopefully toning down anti-Semitism in the U.S. So, I mean, as you all know very well, it's a difficult. I gotta say, I don't have good news. It's a very difficult period.
So there are so many pieces to this puzzle. I want to remind everyone to type in the Q&A any questions you have. I want to go back a little bit, if I may. There are reports coming out in the Israeli press about what the army knew or didn't know, or did or didn't do. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So, I don't want to, we're not going to run the investigation committee here because, obviously we don't have all the evidence. But there are growing signs, and every day we get more and more signs that actually the writing was on the wall, and not even in classified documents. We had, I don't know if you know that some of the hostages, Israeli soldiers, female soldiers, are what we call tatzpitaniyot. There's the ones that basically sit on. They're in they're on the fence basically with Gaza on the border, and they're supposed to just observe for 9 hours a day. That's what they do. They observe the scene. They had multiple reports going up the ranks saying that they're seeing trainings, that they're seeing that they're practicing. Hamas is practicing planting IEDs on the fence, bringing heavy machinery like tractors and stuff. There were attempts to hurt the observation equipment. They're like those zeppelins, like these balloons that were down. In one really kind of scary report, one of these soldiers said that she had witnessed one of what was probably the final training, when she saw a car, a very fancy car, and she was like, no one in Gaza has this fancy car. I don't know if it was a Bentley or, but it was very clear it belongs to a Hamas leader. She said that the Hamas leadership came to observe it, and they timed terrorists from the time it took them to like run from where they were to the fence and back. So it's to detonate because they open the fence at different people. And she said it when she pointed her camera to look at that person with the fancy car, he looked at her and pointed his finger like this, no, no, no. So it was, all the signs were there, but the reports, when they went up the ranks, were dismissed. They say, okay, you're seeing this, but it's just an exercise. They're just trying to fool us. It's not in their interest to start an attack. There are other reports within the 8200, which is like Israeli NSA and intelligence, saying that Hamas is planning an attack with incredible detail and description of what happened. And it appeared in the last few months. And you had those warnings in the intelligence. And the head of military intelligence, DMI, for sure is going to go home. But the question is, who also knew in the chain of command and didn't pass along the information or dismissed it? There's a lot of anger here because of the intelligence failure, and because everyone was under the concept that Hamas has no interest to strike Israel, and that you can come to a sort of like a long-term hudna, ceasefire with Hamas, and we only need to get more water pipes and more money, and that would be okay. There was no readiness. So the intelligence failure also led to an operational failure. So, as American Jews, I assume who's mostly on the line, I would never think that you would see inside Israel proper a kibbutz being occupied by Hamas for 2 full days. I mean, there was no one. There was no one on the border. There were 4 battalions in Gaza and 53 in the West Bank. So that just needs to give you the number. Soldiers were caught there literally in their underwear. There was, I know of, so you hear the stories, and it took many hours of big forces together. Those who were around and were able to come were heroes. And we heard the stories of everyone who came and had an arm and came to save people, and their heroic stories. But the fact that the big, strong IDF was not there, and I think there are going to be a lot of investigations, and a lot of people will have to be held accountable for this. And there's tremendous, I tell you, I'm in reserve duty now. There's tremendous guilt within the IDF. There's tremendous guilt. People just feel that, and rightly so.
So heading in a direction I didn't think we'd go to at this point, but let's get into a little bit of the politics. What's going to happen with the current government? Are the policies that the prime minister is doing influenced by the members of his government, and how is that playing out?
Wow. Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's a really good question, and one to which it's harder to assess Israeli politics, right? It's always so crazy, and now even crazier. There's this government, and it has its very hawkish branch led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, who have a veto right in the cabinet. Then, just for the war, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, who's just terrible. His son just was killed today. In Gaza, and Gideon Sa'ar, they joined to be like a war cabinet, sort of to offset those others who have other agenda, but to win this war, I will say, I'll try to be polite. And in the tension between, what do we do? So, for instance, Israel vowed initially not to even get a glass of water into Gaza, right? We'll lock it, we'll siege Gaza, they should pay for it. And very quickly on, it was very clear this is not going to fly. Not going to fly with the international community. There was a big discussion. I'll give you an example about fuel. Fuel is needed to turn on desalination plants and water plants, and for hospitals, right? All these things. And there was a big U.S. pressure to bring fuel in. It was also, and Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir wanted to veto the fuel. But without fuel, you wouldn't get American support. So it gets from the tactical on fuel and to other things. They also, Ben Gvir voted against the hostage deal. And I think that if there's any silver lining, if you saw the videos of them coming back home and kids who were in, Hamas captivity, going back to kindergarten, and I don't know how anyone can look straight in the mirror and say that this deal was not a good deal. This deal was good, so in terms of like a next hostage deal, in terms of what do you do next, what compromises is Israel willing to do on the humanitarian front with Gaza? We haven't mentioned it, but the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, who maybe is not like your ideal partner, but it's definitely not a terrorist. I mean, it has this problem with the prisoner payment, which we can go into, but themselves as a government, they don't endorse terrorism in a sense that, they're Israel's partners fighting Hamas. They're teetering on the brink. And for a variety of reasons, and many of them are in Israel's hands. For instance, Israel withholds tax payment transfers, which are a lifeline for them, and this is where this branch of the government vetoes it. So, in a sense, I think the prime minister is torn between knowing he needs to do some things to retain U.S. support that is essential for the success of the war in Gaza, to avoid, and this is really important, to avoid a second front, not in the north, but in the West Bank, which is a real concern, by the way, a real concern of the U.S. government. And they are hearing this. There's a train of U.S. officials coming here, and Israelis are hearing about their concerns about the West Bank. But on the other hand, because Netanyahu really wants to keep his coalition together, he's constantly choosing. He's walking between the lines, but on the big things, he's still with his coalition partners. So we will see. We will see how this longs. Netanyahu has been prime minister for how many years? 15 now, with a small break in the middle. So I've learned not to say this is the end, because who knows? He's very unpopular. This government is extremely unpopular now in Israel. They're being held accountable for what happened and for the mismanagement of the country since. The joke is that Israelis are just wonderful people and they just deserve better leadership. So how it affects politics, I don't know. We're not going to elections anytime soon because of the war, but I think you hear growing protests from people, and there are protests in front of the government. So there's an assumption that once this thing, you take it down a notch, the fighting, you will have a lot of people back on the streets demanding their resignation. And where this leads, I don't know.
So related to this are the calls for the PA, the Palestine Authority, to take control of Gaza when the war is over. So question one, what are Israel's war aims? How practical are they? Because you hear two different, wiping out Hamas and freeing the hostages, and what comes. So what are your thoughts about that?
So this is, I think, the biggest question in terms of, and it ties everything together of what we just spoke about so far. So I think Israel and the international community are unified in the sense that at the end of this operation, we don't want to see Hamas, and we don't want to see vacuum, chaos, and anarchy, and you don't want to see, or at least they say they don't want to see like a military rule of Gaza, Israeli military occupation of Gaza. Clearly, there's going to be a security presence of Israel for a long time. But they don't agree, Israel doesn't agree with the international community on what, yes. The international community says, well, there are not that many products on the shelf. It's going to be the Palestinian Authority that there's a new term coined, a revitalized Palestinian Authority, as Biden said. God knows what it means, but we need to put content into this. But really, the Palestinian Authority is extremely weak, not because of this operation and needs to be strengthened and reformed. They have to do the job, the Palestinians themselves. But as a vision, right? As a vision, you want the Palestinian Authority, after it undergoes all the changes it needs to go to go back to Gaza. And this is where Israel says no. When you tell them, so who yes, they're like, we don't know. Maybe there'll be new leadership. Maybe it'll bring international coalition. Maybe Arab countries will do this. And, you know, I do think that, and at Israel Policy Forum, we just issued a paper that's coming out, I think today. If not today, no, sorry, early next week, probably Monday, a paper. And we're looking at this sort of like elements of Palestinian Authority, elements of the Palestinian Authority, but augmented, supported by an international coalition and regional coalition of Arab countries who will help with the stabilization and the recovery and reconstruction. But you don't get all these other pieces, you don't get the other support if the PA is not the center of this, if this is not time bound, if it's not, no one's going to come. So I think this is the tension where we, you know, trying to say, okay, you want to do humanitarian, the world wants to do this, but the world wants to know that there's an end game. And with all the respect, an end game of like, we're done with Hamas, it's very, very ambitious. I don't know if it's possible, but also it's not just what's not, it's also what's yes. Of course, that if Netanyahu agrees to some sort of vision with the PA, it means that he will have to concede to different things with the PA in the West Bank, and this breaks down his government. You know, over fuel, he's not going to break the government's government. So we'll see. I do think that at the end of the day, this is the only viable solution. It doesn't mean that it will happen, but it's the only viable solution that would avoid Israel being dragged into controlling Gaza for many, many, many years to come in a war of attrition, which unfortunately could be a very likely scenario. But for that to happen, I think, and I say this with great sadness, sort of the responsibility is on the U.S. Only the U.S. is the party that can convince Israel, I don't want to say pressure Israel, but convince Israel, use its leverage with the Palestinians to say, like, we brought you back to life, you need to do these reforms, convince the Arabs to give in a hand in ways that they've never imagined, and work with the UN to support this. Only the US can do that.
Why do you say that? Because
let's think about it. I mean, what's needed, right? We need, let's say we're in a world, in a coalition, Israeli coalition, that doesn't just say no, 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 no. They say, okay, sure, PA, come in. The PA is extremely weak. It's extremely weak politically, economically, security-wise. There's been pressure on the PA to reform for a long, long time, and they haven't. Only the U.S. can give the PA what they want, which is, again, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO office in Washington. Legislation changes in Washington, you know, ATCA, Taylor Force, that would allow transfer of money. The support they need. There's this 3-star U.S. general who trains forces, Palestinian forces. You need to have a surge. You need the capacity coming from the Americans to lead this mission. They're doing a great job, but they can't increase without a U.S. support and leadership. In terms of Israel, Israel only trusts the U.S. You know, it has very strong relationship with Germany, strategic partnership with the U.K., with France, but really, and this war proved it, the U.S. is really the only reliable partner. Only the U.S. can tell Israel, you know, we have your back. Let's have this attempt with the PA, and we will have your back. We will keep supporting you in the UN, in other international forums. We will keep supporting you, of course, militarily, and we will maybe be observers of the new security setting in Gaza. When we talk about the UN, if there could be a UN mandate to bring in sort of an international peace enforcement coalition, The UN would have to create that, right? The UN would have to compromise with China and Russia on something to be able to achieve that. So the US would have to, the only one who can orchestrate this. Nothing that Israel will offer the UN is not going to pass. Maybe if it comes from another country, but the US is the most important actor in the UN. In terms of the humanitarian stuff also, right? If you want to recover Gaza, yeah, it's true that Egypt can have a conference, but only the US can rally the international community for reconstruction. If the US wants Jordanians and Arabs and Egyptians and Moroccans and Emiratis to help them in Gaza with security missions or setting up more hospitals, those Arabs are going to respond to US incentives and pressures, not to Israelis. Egypt is the recipient of US aid. If someone needs US support, well, this is where the leverage is. Jordan wouldn't survive without US support. So I think it's hard to be the only superpower, but that's what we get here, and it's really important in the Middle East. And with great power comes great responsibility, and so I just don't see any way of getting anywhere without the US. And by the way, we wouldn't be where we are now if it wasn't for the US.
I want to get back to the question of war goals and eliminating Hamas. Your colleague wrote a piece a number of weeks ago about how Hamas is an idea. And it doesn't matter how many Hamasnikim, how many Hamas fighters or terrorists, whatever you want to call them, you kill, it's an idea that'll go on. At the same time, I know that Dr. Khalil Shikaki did a poll recently where support for Hamas on the West Bank has gone up. So, and which is troubling. It was, I believe the number was 17% before October 7th. Now it's in the 30s. Can you address that?
Yeah, so I mean, Hamas started as it started as a social welfare religious movement. It's an idea, and even as it has become a terrorist organization, it is an idea. ISIS has not been defeated. Al Qaeda hasn't been defeated. Like the idea, you still have even ISIS flags in Gaza now. But the thing is, the goal, the objectives of the war are to eliminate Hamas's ability to threaten Israel's security and to govern Gaza. Can you get there? There's a big question. What does it mean? Do you take out 60% of its military capabilities, 80%? Do you have to kill all of its leaders or not all its leaders? What are the institutional symbols you see, like Israel, striking the court, the central court in Gaza? It's because it has a sort of like a public image to this, that we're destroying Hamas. Assuming the military operation is successful, it would mean that Hamas has lost the ability to threaten Israel militarily, and there's this vacuum that has to be filled with another force. That it no longer can, previous operations. This is a war; it's different. But previous operations, both Israel and Hamas at the end said that they won. The idea is this cannot be the outcome of this one. Only Israel should say it won. Will it mean that you don't have pockets of insurgency and Hamas affiliated and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and other insurgents in Gaza later? No, of course not. Does it mean that the idea is not alive, and Islamist idea, and you have a generation now in Gaza that's all they know? The Palestinians were not religious as people relative to the rest of the Arab world, but it's been 70 years of Hamas rule, they are. So I don't know what it means in terms of like playing like whack-a-mole. What do you say that to be later standoff operations against an insurgency? The idea will not die, and maybe I'm naive here. I think the hope is that there will be another way offered. We have to say that support. I know Khalil's Shikaki's survey. Support for Hamas has not gone up in Gaza or stayed the same. In the West Bank, it has gone up quite a lot, as you mentioned, but it's still not the majority.
Right.
still not the majority, and we're looking at polls of the same poll that asked for a two-state solution. Still, the support for two-state solution among Palestinians remains the same, which is interesting because if you look previously at surveys during military operations, you'd have increased support for Hamas and a decline in support for a two-state solution, and we haven't seen this decline yet. What does it mean? Time will tell, but it's important to win over Hamas because otherwise the implications are that Hamas can do this again and again and again, and this is the only way that works, and that Israelis eventually, only understand force and power. There's what the Palestinians see or not see. I think it's interesting that you mentioned in the survey, probably like stuff that you also hear in the U.S. 70 or 80% of Palestinians say that they haven't seen the videos that Hamas themselves posted. I find it really hard to believe because we all saw them. And those are in Arabic and Hamas posted them. Those who saw them, apparently a majority of Palestinians believe that they're fake. That's very difficult for Israelis to hear. Israelis, I think even those on the left that want to say there's Hamas and there's the public, they're like, okay, but the public, show us that you're empathetic toward us, and I think there's a lot of work to be done on that side to bring this.
Yeah, getting to what's happening on the ground. You have we talked before we started about the cost, the lives being lost on both sides. How is this impacting Israel, seeing what's happening in Gaza, plus losing their own sons and daughters?
I mean, losing the sons and daughters is terrible, and it's I have to say, because I don't know how many of you watch Israeli news and in Hebrew, but it's like we live here in Israel. We are still living the October 7th moment. People in Be'eri, in one of the kibbutzim, are still there are like archaeological teams that are searching for remains of people in the ashes of houses burned to the ground. We have not finished identifying the dead. We don't know. Every day you hear of another person that we thought was kidnapped, but they actually found their body. We're still in the October 7th moment, and in a sense, every soldier that dies is part of that death toll. So it's tragic, and that's all we see on the news here. You don't see so much here, I gotta say, what's happening in Gaza, the destruction that you see. So we see today a group of soldiers lighting up the menorah for Hanukkah, right? It's the first day of Hanukkah, which they brought back to Gush Katif, a settlement that was evacuated by Israel. This is not helpful, right? It's dangerous for a variety of reasons, because it could signal to someone that, even though it's not a directive from the top, that Israel wants to reoccupy Gaza. Israelis' hearts are hardened now when it comes to the Palestinians. As someone who cares a lot also about civilian lives in Gaza, when I say, even to liberal friends of mine, I say that it's terrible that so many women and children die, and these are the highest numbers because of the population makeup in Gaza. Most of the population are under the age of 18. I get comments that we don't care and they deserve it, and I think this will change too. People are understandably upset. So you get less compassion. There are groups, however, that think that that show sympathy and hope this is over soon. There are groups of physicians and of water experts calling to bring in as much humanitarian aid into Gaza as possible. And there's an understanding by everyone in the military, and by the way, also in the government, except for a couple of people, that the humanitarian alleviating the humanitarian issues in Gaza, and that includes also, reducing the death toll, is the only way to continue enlisting U.S. support for the military operation. So instead of, like we call it, extending the fighting clock, it is linked directly to the humanitarian effort. So whether it comes from compassion or from its self-interest, the IDF is willing to facilitate, they're not bringing in, but facilitate humanitarian aid into Gaza. The problem is that Israel is refusing to, that's defense minister directive, to let any aid go through the crossing with Israel, which is big and can check and deliver hundreds of trucks a day. So everything goes through Egypt, and it's a port in El Arish, and then to Rafah, and then to Nitzana, and then back to Rafah, and there are a lot of bottlenecks on the way. So aid is not coming in the quantities that we would want. And also, once it's in Gaza, it's very difficult to move it around because of the fighting and because of the roads that are done. So there are a lot of smart people who are now thinking about how to improve the humanitarian response. And I know it's something that the U.S. administration cares about deeply, which is why Israelis will have to care also.
So what is the rationale for not allowing the Kerem Shalom opening? That's passageway into Gaza from Israel. What is?
Yeah. Okay, so
difficult questions. I'm sorry.
No, it's a very good one. I'm happy you're knowledgeable and we go into the weeds on this. Listen, Kerem Shalom is the best crossing. What happened on October 7th is that Hamas in their attack, they ruined everything, right? The only thing they didn't touch is Kerem Shalom. And there's an assumption that they didn't touch it because Hamas assumed, okay, we're done with this thing, and then we'll keep getting our stuff through Kerem Shalom. So the Israeli Ministry of Defense, but also politics, is like, why would we give Hamas what they want? If we open Kerem Shalom, it needs to be in return for give us hostages, give us something. You don't just do it to surge in humanitarian aid. So I think that's one thing. And because Kerem Shalom is in the south and Rafah is in the south, in a sense, they said, well, it's interchangeable. In the beginning also, Israel said no glass of water will go in. And then they decided to open 2 water pipes. And then, so there were a lot of no's, and the state of mind, there's a shift in mindset now to go take more in. So Kerem Shalom could open. It could open either for being just for the security checkups or for actual entrance. I think I don't want to say a red line because we've seen that the red lines are more malleable, but I think the Kerem Shalom will open soon when there will be a need for when it's clear that there are more trucks and they can't go in. The bottlenecks now, again, as I said, Nitzana is a point, you probably know it, is by your kibbutz, or not far from K'tura, right? That area in the south. Nitzana is where the Israelis are doing the security checkups, and then they send into Rafah, but the bottlenecks are mostly on the Egyptian side. So we're stuck at the 200 trucks maximum. In practice, you need to bring in, I don't know, 1,000 a day. It's a political consideration. Again, one which that any move on Kerem Shalom will come from an American push.
So again, this is all, the Israelis are doing what they're doing, and they're waiting, and they're expecting pressure to come from outside of Israel as happened until now as well.
And it's coming now. This is Kerem Shalom, but there are we can be creative in this, right? Like there's the Erez crossing in the northern part of Gaza. For now, the north is really, it's not a livable. It's going to be very hard for people to actually go back there, even though some have gone back. But if the IDF decides, well, we clear this area and this can actually be a humanitarian safe zone for the population to come in here, technically you can open areas, which was used for access and movement of people and not of goods before. Areas is destroyed. soldiers there died and were killed and murdered and kidnapped. But you can sort of rebuild something, and then you don't remove the red line of Kerem Shalom, and you do it something for more, either it's more gradual or just a pointed operation. We bring in only tents for a safe zone through areas. By the way, the Cypriot government, Cyprus, also offered to have used their port in Larnaca, the city of Larnaca, their port, for all the security checkups, bringing everything to Gaza via sea and with all the security arrangements. But guess who they approached to facilitate this and support financially? The U.S. Not just the U.S., but also the Emiratis, but also the U.S. And this is something that Israel is also considering. So Kerem Shalom is one. There are other options for crossings, and I think they all have to. They're all being weighed. There are pros and cons. And also depending on timeline, right? If what we say now is not what I'm going to say in 3 weeks from now,
Right.
And more crossings could open as Hamas is undermined.
So getting to the hostages and that dilemma. I know that there was a meeting a few days ago between members of the family, the hostages themselves, and representatives of the government that did not go well. Could you explain how did that play out, and how is that being seen by the Israeli public?
Listen, I say this with great frustration, because I have my criticism about this government, but as an Israeli, and you lived here yourself for 12 years, there are many parts of this country, it's a mess and it's chaotic and stuff, but it's not supposed to feel that the government is not attuned to security risks. And this sort of what people felt, and the captives, it's been a really rocky for them, not getting the support from the government all along, even those who got their loved ones back. There was a meeting at the Kiryat, the Emiratis, they didn't find enough chairs for them. Ministers said, but the families of hostages didn't get chairs, so they were locked outside of the Kiryat, the MOD, in the rain. It just awful all around, and they didn't get phone calls, and the government anyway. So this is just continuation of something we've seen. The families of now we're talking about 138 hostages in Gaza. Not everyone is alive. Okay, not everyone's alive. Probably substantial. I don't. Many of them are not alive, but there are 138, and also their bodies have to come back. Hostages in Gaza, and they tell the government every day of fighting, you are risking the lives of our loved ones. So because of the fighting itself, because of the humanitarian situation in Gaza, if there's no food for Palestinians, do you think the hostages will get food? Because of infectious diseases, we are now there are indications for a hepatitis either A or E breakout in Gaza. It will affect our hostages also, not to mention other health stuff. The campaign itself, right? We believe that the hostages are probably using as human shields to Hamas leadership and operatives. There was a leak in the press that Israel has this idea to float the tunnels with a seawater. So they will bring seawater in pipes, and they will drown Hamas leadership or make them come out. And families said, "Wait, but our sons and daughters and fathers, they're there. They're in the tunnels with them. So you're going to drown them?" So there's a big tension, and I got to tell you, this is where I wouldn't want to be voting on this one, because if we don't continue this military operation and we give Hamas everything they want, we know what's going to be the end of that. On the other hand, it could be death verdict for the people who are there. We would have loved to see a deal of like Hamas, another hostage deal. I don't think one is coming in this stage. One might be coming in a few weeks. Hamas said they'd be open for an all for all. All for all means the 6,000 or so prisoners in Palestinian prisoners in Israeli prison. And, these include also terrorists who participated in the October 7th attacks and Marwan Barghouti. It's just like this is something that I think a lot of Israelis will have a hard time on versus the deal that we had before, that first of all, women and children, we just wanted to get them out. And I think it's a miracle that we got who we got out. And also the ones that were out on the Palestinian side are like, oh, fine. Not terrible risk, not people that maybe are, I would put a kosher stamp on them, but really not a big thing. I think we're talking about something much bigger here. And it's very difficult.
So we have 8 minutes to go. Someone asked a question: how might another coalition have conducted the response to October 7th differently? Would we have seen more of an effort for international support?
I don't know. I think that I should say, I think Israel got tremendous international support, at least in the beginning. It got tremendous international support from Europe and from the United States and from Australia, New Zealand, and other places. And I think from Arab countries, some of them publicly have to say different things, but sort of like in back channels, they say, please finish Hamas, and we're seeing more support from the Egyptians. Really, the Egyptians, if you think about it, they're doing security checkups for Israel. It's not something that we could have imagined before, right? Egypt, proud nation. And so I think Israel is getting the support. And you could say this coalition is getting support despite not getting the support on October 6th, right? We know Biden didn't want to come here, and Netanyahu was a pariah in Washington, not just in Washington, right? By the way, everywhere. And you got those hugs and the trains of leaders that came here. Where a different coalition, and it's assuming a coalition without the right-wing hawks, I think would have gone into the military campaign, the response would have been the same. But I think another coalition wouldn't take the risks in the West Bank that we're seeing.
In the sense,
so I think
you mean
Israel's policy now in the West Bank is undermining the Palestinian Authority. We don't need another front in the West Bank. We don't. Withholding a transfer of taxes, not finding solutions for the 80,000 construction workers, Palestinians who worked in Israel. This was sort of a lifeline, budgetary lifeline. We're talking about raids into areas A's, and so we're talking about settler violence in numbers that we've never seen before, with the active support and encouragement of this government. We wouldn't see this. And by the way, I don't want to say it's not on anyone's blame, but the fact that we had 53 battalions in the West Bank on October 7th and only 4 in Gaza is also a result of this coalition, because Tzvi Sukkot and members of the extreme right wing, they had to put a sukkah in Nablus. And these are policies that I have a feeling would not have been approved, definitely not pushed by a different coalition. And I'm not going into the normative, right? It's our land, Jewish West Bank, the Judea and Samaria, the Joseph Tomb. I'm not going to these places. It's more like an assessment of security risks. I think a different coalition wouldn't have taken this risk. It doesn't mean that this would not have happened. So I don't want to say this, but there's clearly this coalition, there were a lot of so in that regard, I think a different coalition wouldn't do this. I think a different coalition could have been a little bit more careful with the UN. Israel and the UN are in a very difficult place. We have a minister of foreign affairs who doesn't have any background in foreign affairs. We have his director general is someone who has no background in that. I hope we could get to a rapprochement with the UN. The UN has its fair share of blame. I mean, it probably, the failure of UN women to speak about the rapes. I mean, the UN is the UN, don't get me wrong, but Israel needs now the UN. So de-escalation and thing. I will just say another thing that I don't want to speculate. There's going to be an investigation committee, but we know for a fact, when you asked about what the intelligence know or not know, there were at least 3, if not more, clear intelligence warnings that came to the cabinet from the heads of the military and Mossad and Shin Bet that said that this coalition's policies and the internal divisions within Israel and the legal coup, which they called reform, is making Israel's adversaries more believe that Israel is weaker, and it incentivizes them to attack and assume risks. We, by the way, said it at IDF also, but based on assessments before. So whether Hamas would have done it if Israelis were not on the streets protesting, if this government seemed like it was about to unite the country and not tear the country apart, we don't know. We can't play what if. But there could be a chance that another coalition wouldn't have found itself in this predicament, that their response would have been faster because you would have more IDF on the Gaza border, and that now the management in terms of the response, and it's not about the initial international response, but it's maintaining the international support. That's where another coalition could have been helpful.
So we got 3 minutes. Any words about a light at the end of the tunnel?
Okay, yes, we should be optimistic. I do think, and I know it might be, I do think that if this is done right, and if we're able to inflict harm on Hamas in ways that really, I mean, it's just awful, right? We don't have to blabber the point about why Hamas has to go. And Hamas is bad for Israelis, but it's bad for Palestinians also. I think that if we're able to do this, and if we're able to create a sense of like, okay, we can't manage this conflict, we need to solve this conflict. Conflict management has not worked, or it worked for a period and it's not going to work again. There's an opportunity for reforms here. There's an opportunity for reform of the Palestinian Authority to make it this partner and a neighbor that you can trust, right? That delivers services for its people, but also that Israel can trust and do more. There's a reform of the relationship with the UN, but also of UNRWA. UNRWA is an organization that has parastale services all over Gaza. Sadly, it's the only one capable of delivering the aid now. But if you have to surge, and maybe you will counterintuitively have to give UNRWA more money, but I think the fact that we're exposing its ties to Hamas, this now is the opportunity to say, like, no, this reform that you've promised us, you're only getting what you're getting, and for a temporary period, for a surge, but it's conditioned on these reforms that you have to go through. The PA goes under reform, and both publics, for the benefits of children all over here, understand that there's no military solution really, that we all kind of stuck here, not going anywhere, and we have to find a way to solve this conflict. So
thank you, Dr. Efron, and the Israel Policy Forum for this enlightening presentation and sharing your knowledge and your expertise to shed light on how we can navigate this dark time by becoming more informed. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. We look forward to inviting you to more programs like this. Have a great day.
Thank you. Happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah.